My writings can help people feel a deeper compassion toward the other sex, which I feel right now men have, the women's movement did a wonderful thing and it expanded the options for women and it gave women multiple opportunities that, my daughters would never have had a chance to have 50 years ago.
Right.
And at the same time, it had two huge shadow sides to it. One was the demonization of men and the other one was the undervaluing of the family. So I started speaking all around the world on women's issues. But I realized that as I was speaking on these issues, I really wasn't getting people to understand each other. So I started to, instead of just representing women's perspectives only, I had all the men in the audience come forth in a role reversal date. I said every woman is in a beauty contest every day of her life. So if you really want to walk a mile in women's moccasins, come up here, walk a mile in women's moccasins. Women, get into the audience. You're the judges now. You just look over the boys and men just from the bodies. And from that moment on, I called them just boys. And the women then chose their top 6 candidates. And we asked moral virtue questions to the top 6 candidates. And the guys went through the process and they said, whoa, I've never felt so devalued, just focused on from my body. And I'm really glad I won or as a finalist in the beauty contest, but I'm also feeling like what many women must feel like, just having their bodies be important to the other sex. And so the guys got it. And then I'd ask the women to take some of the risks of sexual rejection that men often take. And so I've already segregated the women into the women who were projecting that in college, they would 5 years after college earn the most money, and the women that would earn the least money. Some of the most attractive women were in the back rows projected to earn the least money. And so I had to work on the guys to let themselves only be attracted or only be interested in the women who were in the front rows who would projected to earn the most money, who could take the best care of their children, move into the best neighborhoods with the best schools and so on.
Right. It becomes a snowball.
It became a snowball. And that was a job, getting the guys to focus on the women in the front rows, especially the ones that were the less attractive of those women. And so, but I did. And then those women in the back rows began to feel like losers, like guys who earn very minimal or no money are losers. Most guys know that they could be reading the boy crisis in the unemployment line and nobody would care. Then the women came up and asked the men out, and I persuaded them to go to the men that they were most attracted to, no matter what, which were usually the guys that were finalists and the winners of the beauty contest. And so those guys got, many women coming to them, and they started to just feel very pretty proud. And the women started to compete to say that, I have a Porsche, or I'll take you out to the best restaurant, or, I'll do this and that, lying to the left and right just to be not rejected. And so the women came back afterwards and said, man, up until this moment in my life, every time I've used the word jerk, it's meant guys. But I clearly, in trying to compete to get a guy to go out with me, I clearly behaved like a jerk.
Yeah.
I lied, I exaggerated, I physically pulled the guy to come with me to separate him out from the other guys. I'm so glad I'm not a guy. Would be the most frequent comment I'd get from the women.
Yeah.
And so what I left at the end of the time with was just this enormous appreciation on the part of both sexes for the burdens that the other sex carried and how little they understood about that. And that's sort of if one were to summarize me and my style in a sentence or in a concept, it would be, walking a mile in each other's moccasins. And what we need is every part of the male-female movement to be willing to represent the feminist perspective and more conservative women's perspectives, liberal men's perspectives and more conservative men's perspectives. No movement on gender can be a balanced, loving movement unless it represents all 4 of those perspectives. What we have done to this point in history is take a magnifying glass to women's experience of powerlessness and women's experience of male power. But no one has taken a magnifying glass to the male experience of powerlessness and the male experience of female power. Here's what we train boys to be. We train boys to have what I call heroic intelligence,
Yes.
which is the opposite of health intelligence. So think about throughout all of history, in order for us to not be under Nazi rule today, we had to train that generation of boys to be willing to die at the age of 18, to be willing to be disposable. And so that boy, in order to be willing to be disposable, it was functional for him to not be in touch with his feelings, because the more you're in touch with your feelings, the more you value your feelings, you value yourself, and the less you want to be disposable. And the more you're going to say, ow, that hurts, as opposed to, doesn't hurt me, just do it more if you need to.
Well, let's slow down a little bit. Let's talk about stage 1 versus stage 2. I often say that we have laws built for 1920, not 2020, a world where women couldn't get a job or a decent job. They couldn't go to college. They couldn't probably even graduate high school. Now we're in a world where 60% of college graduates are women, 60% of master's degree graduates are women. Over half of doctors and lawyers graduating are women. We're no longer in that. We're no longer in that world where women would face destitution if they split.
Yes.
And
this, by the way, was the brilliance of the women's movement. They prepared women effectively for the next stage of life, the post-survival stage, in which they intuitively sensed there would be permission for divorce. Right. And therefore, our daughters needed to be prepared for a world where they weren't just completely dependent upon male income.
And it would be bad for them to always be dependent.
Yes, exactly.
So for stage 1, as I understand it, stage 1 is, he would do the hunting or the fishing or the plowing of the fields, and she would take care of the children and take care of making all the food from scratch, cleaning the house, and there was no more time.
Yes.
Everything was dire. If there was no food, you would die.
Right.
There's no government to come give you money to save you. And now we're in a world where we have all these appliances and machines, and everybody has a lot of education, and we're free to go out and make money. The thing I find fascinating about your writing is male disposability. I have been dwelling on this for about 2 or 3 years, pondering over it, really digging through it. And for men, we have to lose our life to get a life.
Yes.
For men, in order to find a woman, we have to work extra hard. And once we do find them, in order to keep her, we have to work even more hard. And depending on who you read, 8 out of 10 women initiate divorce if you're not college graduated.
If there's children involved.
If there are children involved. 9 out of 10 if she is college graduated. I find that very perturbing. And I look back at the divorce initiations post-war in the late 40s, and they're almost on parity. And now women are initiating.
Yes.
And it seems to be for 2 reasons. One is cash and prizes. The money is just so good. And 2 is the happiness trap. The happiness trap is essentially, I'm not happy. I'm focusing on the 1% that's wrong as opposed to the greaterness of my life and my life outcome for my children. It just seems to be that these are the 2 things that are really causing it to crunch.
Yes.
And then we have a system that is based entirely on male disposability, where we get a divorce and men are destroyed. They're destroyed. 70% of our net take-home pay is destroyed. Either it's the child support hustle or what have you. The problem when I'm pouring through data is I see the silent generation is married at 75%. Generation X, like myself, is 50%. The millennials are at 25%, and Zs are supposed to be somewhere at 15%. When I talk to men all across the country, none of them are getting married. They're running away from it. And it's not they're running away from it like they're cowards. I think they're being mindful. It seems to be like to live a mindful life, you have not to get married because you're going to get looted by a court. The one fascinating thing I really found is that Colorado and Southern California lead the world in fertility clinics. 40% of people running at a fertility clinic are heterosexual couples. The other 40% are LGBT for obvious reasons. And what struck me was the other 20% were single men looking to avoid the family court. If you're a poor man, you're going to end up paying $150,000 to $200,000 in child support. If you're a middle class man, it's $500,000, let alone all the legal entanglements.
Yes.
And when I talk to men in their 20s, they're like, no, I'm never going to get married. And I talk to people in their 40s and 50s about this construct of cash and prizes, and they're like, oh, this is ridiculous. I'm going, When I talk to them in their 20s and early 30s, they say, oh, my dad went through it, my uncle went through it, my brother went through it. I'm not doing this. It's a nightmare.
Yes.
And then when you look at the birth rates, the falling birth rates, in 1970, we used to have about 3.5 children per couple. Now we have 1.8. We're heading to 1.5 very quickly. It seems to me that we are running towards the end of marriage altogether.
Yes.
It's interesting. I've talked to some women that say, well, men just use their money to lord over them. And in response, I'm like, I don't see any garbage collectors or taxi cab drivers or any of that where they do that. They do that in order to have or to keep their marriages or to get a girlfriend.
Yes.
That's why they do it. It's not to lord money over you.
Yes.
And as a man, I hear that and I'm affronted with this construct of that. I have to work super hard to get one and to keep one.
Yes.
I mean, that's my own inner disposability.
And so, yes, what happens with when you look at the fact that men who aren't married and don't plan to be married, that they earn less than women do. Women who have never been married and never have children earn 117% of what men who have never been married and never have children earn. Then you start asking the question, well, why is that? So men are not just inherently oriented toward wanting to earn more money. There must be, because when they don't plan to be married, they actually earn less. So what is the process that leads to men earning more? And I think maybe a good example of that, that my first insight into that came when Gloria Steinem and I were about ready to do AM New York. And so we get into a cab and we're talking about this issue, and the cab driver overhears us and hears that we're going to a TV station. And he says, are you guys talking about this issue on TV? And the issue was that men have the power and women don't. Men had privilege and women don't. And this is the years that I was just beginning to question this, but I was not articulating it. And the cab driver sort of did long pause and he goes, well, would you want to guess how many hours per week I drive a cab? And we go, maybe 40-ish or so. He laughs at us and he goes, like, try 60 to 70. And I'm just the average cab driver driving 60 to 70 hours a week. Do you think I do this to have power? Or did you call it privilege? I do this. So why do you think I do this? And we go, I guess to maybe provide for your family. And he goes, I do this so my kids will not have to do this. I do this so my wife has a good home. Yes. But I do the good home thing because I want us to live in a decent school district so my kids have good schools to go to so they don't have to drive cabs when they get older.
Because at the heart of male disposability is we love others way more than we love ourselves as men. So the thing about male disposability is that, like the cab driver, men are not patriarchal to lord over. It's male disposability. It's we love others, we love our families and our wives, our children, more than ourselves, way more. And we face a world where we're told that we're patriarchal, we're evil, and we do this to lord over people.
Yeah, so let's take apart this whole concept of patriarchy. One of the shadow side of the women's movement was saying that we live in a patriarchal world in which men made the rules to benefit men at the expense of women. Now, this is Feminism 101 in every gender studies course in the world which is mostly in developed nations. And so we have to take that apart. And we don't live in a world dominated by patriarchy. We lived in a world dominated by the need to survive. And to survive, our mothers are expected and pressured to risk their lives in childbirth. And spend their lives devoted to raising those children, often at the risk of their own lives. And so that the feminist movement got, but it framed that portion of women's role as discrimination against women. What the feminist movement missed was the other half of that. And the other half of that was dads were expected to be willing to be disposable in war to protect the children that women bore, so that we wouldn't have to be under Nazi rule. But we gave men social bribes to say, you'll be a hero if you die in war, and if you dress as a Marine and you go off like Dad did, and you fight in the infantry, and if you die, we will say you served your country well. And so little boy grew up saying, I can be a hero, I can stand out, I can be worthwhile, I can be worth something. And oftentimes before he went off to war, he got married so that if he was killed, the wife would have the benefits of the benefits from his pension and so on. So nobody said to their sons, son, you're a male, your job is to be disposable. That concept of disposability completely missed all of us. What we learned was we're going to be a hero by being willing to die in war. And then when we came home from war, we would do whatever we needed to do to earn money that often somebody else would spend, while we again died sooner in the coal mine or in the oil rig or so on. And that was another part of our disposability. So we learned that we would be disposable in war or disposable in work without the word disposable ever being used, therefore opening up, by our not articulating the potential for disposability, opening up the door for feminism to think that the extra money that men earn to be willing to be that coal miner, that truck driver, or that CEO and work 70, 80 hours a week and go wherever the company wanted him to go in order to become that CEO, to think of that as male privilege and male power, as opposed to the male form of discrimination. If you're going to call women's role discrimination, which was the wrong thing to do, it was not discrimination, it was a role. But if you're going to call that discrimination, you have to call the flip side of that discrimination also. The discrimination against men was the expectation and the pressure to earn more money.
Yes.
So the feminist movement took the outcome of earning more money and called it privilege and power for men, and a conspiracy on the part of this patriarchy to design rules that benefited us and not women, and missed completely the fact that from a male point of view, that was the pressure and obligation is not about privilege and power. No one who feels pressured and obligated to do something feels privileged and powerful doing it. Power is about the ability to determine our own lives. What the women's movement has done is given power to women by saying, if you have children, you have three options. Option one is to be full-time involved with the children. Option two is to be full-time involved with the workplace. Option three is to do some combination of both in whatever order you want to do them. And you guys, you have three options too. Option one is to work full-time. Option two is to work full-time. And option three is to work full-time.
We have to work full-time.
Or if you're a working class man, work two jobs, or if you're a upper class man, work overtime. We have two things going on. One is we have a clear double standard. And number two is we have a culture which only shares the pain of the female and not the pressure of the male to have to go through so many sacrifices to get power to begin with, and then to feel that he needs to be willing to give to a woman something when he asks for sex for her, because it's clear in the social exchange that her sex is worth a lot more than his sex is, and therefore he owes her something as a result of having her sexual, quote, favors. Even the word favors shows the bias.
The bias.
But the real equivalent of Harvey Weinstein's is not the reversal in that discrimination. The real equivalent of Harvey Weinstein's is females who planned to get a male pregnant and then have child support come from that male while she raised the child on her own. And that was part of her plan or her plot to begin with. There are ugly men in this world. And Harvey Weinstein clearly has a gifted side and an ugly side. Also, there are ugly women in this world who do really terrible things, but we don't have a culture of #MeToo, of men speaking up about the terrible women that falsely accuse them of doing things with the children that was the equivalent of parental alienation. And then the world is knowing about the 1,000 worst mothers who were only interested in getting money from the father and then were moving off to a different state without regard for their children having contact with their father, and planned all along to marry a man who was very wealthy, so their children would have the protection of his wealth, but never really planned to stay with him to begin with. Only a small fraction of women are like that, but only a small fraction of men are Harvey Weinsteins. But the Harvey Weinsteins are in our face all the time. The most negative women are not in our face. And so we've been walking around in our psyches in a culture of women good, men bad.
Women good, men bad. That's exactly correct.
And that is a toxic attitude toward men.
And that leads to men just throwing their hands up and walking out the door.
Yes. And so
marriage is collapsing because of this. Men
Yes.
are running away.
Yes. What's happening here is that everything males have done to sacrifice themselves, to be willing to be warriors, to be willing to earn money, to be willing to take the hazardous jobs, what I call the glass cellar occupations, the garbage collectors, the jobs that are constantly driving the night shifts, the jobs that are the dirty jobs, the unpleasant jobs are almost all held by males. And the additional money we make to get what I call the death professions bonus has been turned against our fathers. And instead of saying, thank you for making these sacrifices so that you'd earn more money to support the family, we have turned it on its head and said, this reflects discrimination in your favor, the fact that you earn more money, as opposed to understanding that the road to high pay is a toll road. You get high pay because you're willing to serve somebody else, a boss, a company better, not to serve yourself better. You're willing to forfeit your personal power in order to gain more income power to protect your families. Instead of thanking our fathers and our grandfathers for these sacrifices, feminists have gone ahead and focused on this as being more male privilege and male power. So that has left an entire culture of women good and men bad.
Men bad.
Women victims, men perpetrators, and it's left a contradictory message. On the one hand, we hear, I am woman, I am strong. And on the other hand, we hear, I am woman, I've been wronged. And for the feminist movement to call that discrimination in favor of men, as opposed to calling that discrimination against men, or the male role that helped us survive, and thank you for being the garbage collector, thank you for being away, moving wherever you needed to move to benefit the family, and thank you for working overtime and doing psychological take-home work of working in the evenings and working weekends when you would have preferred to be with children. That is, please, thank you for taking that role. And we would like to share that burden with you and like you to share the burden of raising children with us. And what is the male response to that? The Pew Research Center, for the first time in history, asked full-time working men whether they would prefer to be full-time working or full-time with the children. And to their astonishment, 49% of full-time working men, so this is not men unemployed at home, full-time working men said that they would prefer to be full-time with the children, except they couldn't be because they needed to earn the money.
Correct.
And so for half of men, this is an unarticulated, unsympathized with discrimination against men, in which the word discrimination against men is never used, as it is with women playing their role. And men need to stand up and have the courage to say this. And men say to me, well, if I say this in any mixed group, I'm going to just be knocked. I'm not going to be popular.
You're not going to be popular. They're going to be ostracized.
But let me challenge that for a second. Because what I say because I was on the board of NOW, and on the board of NOW, a lot of women spoke up and knew that when they spoke up, they were going to be thought as hating men. And they spoke up nevertheless. They had the courage to do that. And we guys, we have to take responsibility. We can't, as the title of one of my books, I've felt so strongly about this, I titled one of my books, Women Can't Hear What Men Don't Say. It is our time, for the first time in human history. We've been speaking up about a lot of things like getting higher wages, but all the things we've been speaking up about are things that the higher wages protected our families. We were willing to speak up about the things that protected others, but we're not willing to speak up about the things that protected ourselves, because we've always learned that any man who complains about something that affects him is a whiner and a complainer. And women don't fall in love with whining men, they fall in love with alpha men. And we wanted to be the man that a woman fell in love with. And I'll give a really good example, I think, of this, which is buck elks. First of all, understand that in almost all species, about 85% of reproduction occurs from a woman with the alpha male in that species. Buck elks are one of those species that does that. So the females fall in love with the alpha male. The alpha male is the male that grows the biggest antlers. To be the biggest antler growing among the buck elks, about 30 to 35% of your calcium and nutrients and minerals are used up. So you actually are the weakest of the buck elks, but you appear to be the strongest. If the buck elk does not get rid of its antlers immediately after mating period, it risks dying if the winter comes before it replenishes all those nutrients. So this is a really good example, I believe, of men's weakness being our facade of strength. And it's the facade from everybody. The male himself thinks he's the strongest, when in fact he's the weakest. And the male who dies at war he becomes a general. Every time he risks his life at war, he gets promoted. He gets social bribes and promoted to be disposable.
Yeah.
And he thinks of me, I am the head of my pack. And what are you? You are the person who's been most vulnerable to the social bribes for male disposability.
When we talk about male disposability, it's such a hard construct.
Mm-hmm.
It is really hard to deal with it, but I know it's real. I feel it every day. Mm-hmm. And for me, I am that pew charitable person, mm-hmm. meaning I stopped working. I started working part-time because mm-hmm. my son had issues. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I had to do that. Mm-hmm. Because I love my children more than I love myself. It's the golden my ear quote. Yes. That's the reality of that.
In my couples workshops, I have every couple put down on a piece of paper. They all have the exact same paper, the exact same type of pen, and they write down, if you were in a situation where your female partner was about ready to be killed, and you knew that you'd have a 50% chance of dying to save her, but you'd have a 100% chance of saving her, would you be willing to risk your life at a 50% level to have a 100% chance of saving her?
We do it.
And about 98% of the men say yes.
Yeah.
Now, to give women credit, about 80% of the women say yes too.
Oh, yeah.
And so now the amazing thing about this is these are people coming to a couples workshop. In a couples workshop, about a third of those people are saying, if this workshop doesn't work, I'm out of here. So even among, and many of the people coming to the workshop have gone to 4 or 5 therapists or other couples workshops before. I'm happy to say that almost all the couples coming out of there do feel much more in love at the end of that weekend. But the important point here is that the males in particular are willing to die. So even the woman that they feel in great conflict with is ready, it will be able to live. And it really helps the women to just sit back and say, my God, I am sitting next to a man who'd be willing to die for me. And I'm criticizing him because he brought home a quart of milk instead of a half gallon of milk. Maybe I should sort of reassess
what's going on.
What's really going on here.
As a man, and I look at Japan and the Canaries and the coal mine, where Japan's going to lose a third of its population in the next 20 years, and Japanese men face the similar dilemma where they're flooded with herbivore men, grass mm-hmm. eaters, essentially, mm-hmm. where to be a man in Japan, to have a full-time wage, you have to work 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. Mm-hmm. And then what happens is you give your money to your wife, and then she divorces you because it's statistics. You give all your money away. You live in a tiny box by yourself. All these men have basically walked away in Japan saying, it's better for me to have a part-time job for $20,000 a year, mm-hmm. effectively, and I'll get a roommate or two and I'm fine. And what's happening here in the United States is exactly that. Yes. You see tiny homes. You see no buying of these major consumer electronics or any kind of fashion. J. Crew is dying. All that kind of stuff. What you see is all that. Men are not standing up saying, you know what, when I hear this thing about patriarchy and how we're so bad and evil and blah, 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 we just turn and walk and say, fine, we're done.
Yes.
We're done because you're setting me up for any kind of Title IX. You're setting me up for any kind of false rape allegation, or you're going to push me into a common law marriage, or you're going to put me in a marriage fictitious relationship and take all my money and make me homeless. No.
So let's deconstruct that
Yeah.
and take a look at that. So we have two things going on here. One is what I call a purpose void, and another is a dad void. And we have both of them working together. And we have, so let's just use US and Japan since you use those two countries. Historically speaking, in the US and in Japan, boys grew up with a sense of purpose. Their purpose was to be disposable in war or disposable in work. And so the good news is boys today have less need to be disposable in war and disposable in work. Now, in Japan, this is even more so. It used to be during World War II, and when Japan was part of the Axis powers, that every boy was trained to be disposable in war. But when Japan lost in World War II, we took over the protection of Japan. So Japanese boys no longer had to prepare for disposability in war. The good news and the bad news was that they had a purpose void. The good news about a purpose void is you didn't have to prepare to be disposable in order to be a male. The bad news about a purpose void is that you had a purpose void. And the other half of that was what they call the salaryman in Japan, and that women didn't want to marry a man who wasn't a salaryman unless he had a super amount of property. So let's deconstruct that one. Look what's happened in Japan there. The boys, the newer generation of boys that you call, that a high percentage are herbivores, they have a game called Karoshi. Karoshi comes from their parents' propensity to work so hard, the father's propensity to work so hard that they died at the desk or died from overwork. Karoshi means in Japanese, die at the desk or die from overwork, depending on how you define it. And so these boys have what I call boys' uncommon wisdom in the millennial generation of, do I really want to spend my life climbing up a ladder of overworking and dying at overwork? So they've developed a game called Karoshi. And in this game called Karoshi, everybody just climbs, competes to climb up the ladder to the very top, to be this person of male privilege and male power. And the person who gets to the top, what they do, not in real life, but in the game, is they commit suicide.
They commit suicide.
They commit suicide.
But what happens if you get a girlfriend?
You have a girlfriend? I don't know how that works.
I think in the game, if you get a girlfriend, it's a setback because you're not going to kill yourself faster.
Is that right?
That's right.
A nuance of the game.
I had to ask a couple of friends about this game. They were really into it. Oh yeah, it's hilarious.
Thank you. It's another level of proof of that pudding. So you can get a sense that what the Japanese who play Karoshi are onto is that climbing to the top of the ladder to get to against a wall that you never chose out of your choice, what that wall would stand for, what you'd be climbing toward, is not power, but it's a myth of male power. And that is the understanding that led me to writing the book, The Myth of Male Power, that power is about having the understanding and the emotional support to discover who you are internally, and then to be able, with the guidance of your parents, to take that discovery of who you are and with their help guide you to having the combination of pursuing your passion with being able to sustain a family with earning enough money, and put the obligations of income together with the passions of income, because those two are almost always in tension with each other. We hear people say, follow your passion, and your money will come, or follow your. But the truth is, when you follow your bliss, it's the money you'll miss, because when you follow your bliss, you usually follow it to be the artist, to be the writer, to be the actor, to be the musician, and those are the people in the society who have enormous troubles making a living to sustain enough people if they have multiple children. And so we have deprived men of power, and we have defined power as what I would call the definition of male power that is not articulated is feeling obligated to earn money that someone else spends while we die sooner.
Yes, that's
And
exactly
no,
correct.
no woman would be stupid enough to call that power.